So with that, we can go ahead and kick things off. Thanks for joining us for our monthly Climate Career Accelerator session. Also, thank you for sticking with us as we've switched formats from the recurring event page to now having to sign up for every new one. I know it's frustrating, but really appreciate all of you taking that extra step to be here today. Today's session is all about interviews, how you can show up to interviews, how you can be your best self in interviews, how you can get interviews, and then also how you can answer some of the most common questions in a good way that's going to land further interviews and hopefully ultimately a job offer. We're super excited to have Steven Zhang here with us. I'll introduce him in a second, a little bit more in depth, but in the first half of 2019, Steven decided that he wanted to go on an extensive job search. He had been at Tableau for 5 years and wanted to see what the job market was like out there. So he did a very intentional and very action-oriented job search that landed him 18 offers and 22 on-sites. So if you were job searching, you know how hard it is to get an interview, let alone 18 offers. So I thought there'd be no better person to bring on today to talk about what he did to get those 18 offers and really talk through his strategy and all of that to, again, hopefully help some of you optimize your job search. Steven put together a blog on this topic. I just dropped a link to that in the chat. It's called 18 Offers, and it outlines a lot of the stuff that we're going to cover today. So obviously pay attention to what we're talking about today, but then go back and I would study that blog, that guide a little bit more in depth to fully get a glimpse at Steven's experience and what he did to get to this point. The format for today is going to be 30 minutes of like a live podcast, I guess you could say, live Q&A session between Steven and myself. We're going to go over his guide in detail, ask some questions, and then we're going to open it up for breakout rooms for around 25 minutes so that all of you can do a mock interview structure with each other. It's going to be 4 people in a breakout room so that you can practice some of the things that Steven and I are going to talk about. One other note with the guide is Steven has a software engineering background, and the guide is focused on software engineering. I know a lot of you are not in software engineering, but the principles remain applicable to all industries. It's general advice for interviews with a software focus, so still can apply those even if you're not in software. So don't look at that and be like, but I can't apply these, I'm not in software. I'm not either, and I still learned a lot from that. So cool, Steven, super excited to have you here with us today. Do you want to quickly introduce yourself and add any more context that you'd like to add to everything I just covered?
Yeah, sure. I think Natalie mentioned my background in software engineering, worked mostly in data software tools in my career, but always had a climate and environment interest. When I graduated college, it was kind of towards the end of Clean Tech 1.0, if any of you know about that, and had a few friends start like solar companies, and they all failed. So I was like, I should probably just go build a skill and see how I can apply it later. And these days, I run a couple of data businesses related to climate sustainability. And then I also run Climate Techlist, which is a job aggregator, if you've used that tool before. And yeah, this like 18 offers thing is kind of like a side thing I do from time to time. I kind of accidentally wrote it because I had this Google Doc after my 2019 job search that I shared with many friends. I never wanted to publish it, right? It's kind of weird to like join a startup and then be like, oh, hey, look at how I got all these offers and negotiated like with your coworkers. So it was always kind of locked in. But I even kind of didn't realize the demand for some of these insights. So maybe a larger lesson is like, if you have interesting stuff, write it down, put it on the web, see what happens. You never really know.
Yeah, that's a great point. It kind of ties into networking too. You never know what that
Yeah,
post
yeah.
or conversation wise. Cool. So yeah, let's dive into your guide a little bit more. Can you give us a quick overview of the guide? I guess talk through a little bit more in depth than what I just offered up, and then maybe give away your top 3 takeaways. If you had to put them into 3 bullet points, what would be your top 3 takeaways from your guide?
Yeah, sounds great. If you go on the website, especially on desktop, there's like a whole sidebar that gives you the nested table of contents, and I break it into a couple of steps. One is where to apply, and I think it's different a little bit for this audience, all of you, because you want to do something in climate if possible, right? But still, you have to kind of think about what stage of companies, and I think that's actually an area a lot of people don't think too much about. And we can go into more details. Preparing for the interview, um, specifically in software engineering, for those of you software engineers out there, there's like a very weird thing we all have to do that a lot of other job seekers don't, which is this like technical coding, system design stuff, which takes a lot of time. I also have applying to companies, and kind of scheduling the interviews, doing the interviews, accepting the offer and negotiating, and then starting the job. So it's kind of my 6 steps. I won't go into the details on any of those, but I would say kind of the 3 high-level takeaways is, treat it as a job. Like, I think a lot of people know that, but they don't really do it, right? So in your job, you're being evaluated by someone, that you will get promoted or not, and your job, your livelihood as, or income source at least is dependent on it. But it's kind of the same with the job search, right? You're doing the job search either because you want to get a better job or you don't have a job right now. And so I think the difference is it's self-directed. There's no like you don't have a manager. But I still don't think people really internalize that. So that would be like my number one takeaway. And then the downstream of that is, okay, well, if it is your job, what do? You try to operationalize as many things as possible, right? If you're going to do a bunch of these interviews, you might as well like be thorough in who you apply to. Why stop at 1, right? Apply to 10. If you're going to apply to 10, maybe you should have a template. If you're going to do 10 interviews, maybe you should have a script that you go through. If you're going to schedule with many recruiters, maybe you should have a booking link, stuff like that, or like a resume template. So those would say my top takeaways.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And like you said, if you're going to be doing something time and time again, you might as well have a template. And then doing that little bit of extra work is going to save you time in the end. Kind of going off of that, I loved your point in the guide where you talk about how you'd practice your interview questions and you would record the answers to them and then you would hear them back just so that you can start learning a little bit more about what you're talking about, can hear how it sounds to someone else. Can you talk through that methodology a little bit more and why you did that and then how
Yeah.
that worked for you?
Yeah. Okay. So let's go back to operationalizing it, right? So I think for me, I started doing some mock interviews and realized, hey, I'm saying the same thing. I have bullet points. Maybe I should just really flesh it out. Maybe not quite write a script, but like write paragraphs for each. And then I thought about, okay, part of behavioral is honestly memorization. Like it's kind of uh, but it's memorizing your story, your pitch, right? But there's many, many different questions. What are ways I can do to help me memorize something? Well, I can listen to it. So why not record a mock interview, or even just me speaking to the camera, or whatever audio device, and just listening to that, kind of when I'm at the gym or when I'm at something that I don't really need to like pay 100% attention. And that's kind of the background. So, you can do it probably in different ways, but I'd recommend a Google Doc. And the reason Google Doc is like, write out your responses and get a few people to really try to, pick at it, right? This is behavior interview, I think, is in a way, back up a little bit, I guess behavioral is like any question where there's no right or wrong answer, and it's about you, right? Your experience, what you've done in the past. And Yeah, so writing it down, down and having people comment on the Google Doc is helpful, because I think you don't want to, like, if you just do a mock interview, you'll get some feedback from people, but it's not going to be the same level of thoroughness as like commenting on a document. A lot of companies do similar things. And then, the second part is recording it, optional, but it's just a way to help you remember it over time.
Yeah, yeah. And then you can like hear things and then be like, I should have said this and then
Yeah,
add that in the
exactly. Like ideally, you could record every interview that you do and then listen to it, right? But you can't do that. But this is kind of closest you can get. I'll add one more thing. I think behavior interviews is like the closest. If you think about interview as like a decathlon of different events you have to do, and they're all different levels, a lot of different levels of randomness and stuff. For a technical interview, or like a surprise question, it's really kind of random, right? Like you can just control what you say in the moment, but don't have any time to prepare for it. these behavior interviews really should be pretty well prepared. It's like your resume, like you're going to see them, so there's not really any reason you shouldn't have like the best possible response to that.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I feel like a lot of these questions are questions that get asked in every interview. And I know you said that you were noticing trends because you were doing so many interviews of just recurring questions, but maybe for someone who isn't at the point where they're getting lots of interviews right now, do you have any advice for, like, say this is their first interview, or like figuring out which behavioral interview questions they should prepare for?
Yeah. Yeah, I guess let's back up a little bit and give a little more context. So I did my job search in 2019, very different macro environment, especially for software engineers. Probably now I wouldn't get 18, maybe it would be like 5 or something like that. I'm not really sure. I'm not doing a job search right now, but I think so. That's with some context, right? Like, don't feel bad that you're not getting that number. Everyone has a different number based on their background and stuff. But I think it's really a numbers game. So if you there's always more job openings to apply to. You just got to broaden your search, change your expectations a little bit. Um, so I think for these behavioral questions, I think there are very good lists on the internet. Like if you just ask ChatGPT, you could probably have a good list. Some of them include, tell me about, why are you here? Why are you looking for a new job? Some of them are pretty easy, like easier questions. I would say maybe one way to think about it is there's like two categories of like the easy questions where you give a positive answer, and then like the sort of gotcha questions. And there's different philosophies on how to respond to them. But a gotcha question would be like, tell me about a time that you like, had an argument with a coworker and you didn't, your argument didn't win out or something, or tell me about a time that you failed in something. And those you have to be a little more nuanced in. But yeah, so maybe one thing potentially do is try to load up more on the like nuanced questions and really think those out, because you want it to be in an interview to just kind of not quite regurgitate, but like have it reflexively ready to go.
Yeah, yeah. And one thing I'll add to that is a lot of these questions, behavioral interview questions, if you have thought critically about a few main categories, those answers you prepared can be applicable. So if you've prepared the about me, and then in that about me section where you're explaining who you are, you've likely thought about your strengths. You've likely thought about your experiences. You likely thought about times, like Steven just said, where you had a hard situation at work and you had to respond in a certain way. So I would kind of think of it in those categories too, of like, okay, I need to have strong answers for tell me about myself, yourself. I need to have strong answers for where do you want to be in 5 years? I need to have strong answers for what am I good at? Where do I want to go? Those kind of things. And then again, kind of that's why you don't want to memorize, because it's going to be different. You never know what's going to ask, but having those strong talking points. Do you
Yeah,
agree with
yeah,
Steven?
that's true. It's kind of like you take Lego blocks and then you build your answer every time. But I would say, this worked for me. Like, you should write a lot in your prepared documents. Like, as you go, maybe the first one you do, the first mock interview, you have like 10 questions. But as you do mock interview, just keep adding to that and keep editing it. It's kind of your like go-to synthesis of everything about you. And over time, you'll be able to build a pretty big repertoire almost. It's almost like a repertoire for music.
Yeah, and I love the idea, again, going back into it, of recording those and then listening to them. So, like, as the document grows, you always just kind of have that in the back of your mind, and then it becomes second nature. I'd say one of the most nerve-wracking things about interviews is things get easier the more you do them, and a lot of times you don't get that many interviews.
Exactly. Yeah, 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 yeah. Definitely.
Practice.
Like it's the reps, right? Yeah.
Yep.
You can
Yeah.
get them in mocks, or there's no real substitute for doing like a real, like, there's a job on the line kind of interview. But as the quantity increases too, the pressure decreases, where you're like, it's just another job interview, honestly, right? And to be honest, that's kind of how the companies are treating you, unless you're really going for like a super high director level thing where they're like, we only get like one or two candidates. They're definitely interviewing other people. And so you're kind of more, put it bluntly, you're more of a commodity, right? So don't treat this job interview. You should try to treat the job interview the same way they're trying to treat you. At least try to mirror it.
Yeah. And then I guess another thing I'll add too, because I see some comments in the chat about I'm not at the point where I'm getting interviews. These principles that we're talking about are, again, directly applicable to networking. When you're having networking conversations, when you're at an event and you meet someone, you should have your elevator pitch. When you're interviewing, you should have an elevator pitch. These are just common like questions for connecting with people. So even if you're not getting interviews right now, you should still employ these tactics so that your networking conversations can then be elevated and then to have the potential of those turning into interviews. So yeah, I think these skills again are just good job search practices that can be applied across a whole host of job elements.
Yeah, exactly. And let me add one more thing to that is this actually applies when you start a job or when you're at a job, right? How are you, instead of, when you start job searching, you're like, oh, I'm going to fill out what I've done, what I've accomplished. You should be writing a doc like that when you're at a company to build for your annual review, right? Like most companies have some kind of review process. Don't fill that out from memory once a year, maybe once a month. I used to have a calendar invite that would tell me like, hey, every week fill out like what I've done, kind of build that document. So then every 6 months when we had the review, semi-annual review, I just kind of go from there. I'm like already 50% way down. And also that's like the perfect document to use for interviewing, writing your resume, writing these behavioral, this behavioral cheat sheet thing.
That's a great point. Yeah. I feel like so much of the job search is people are like reaction. I need to go get a job. I need to go get an interview. And yeah, that makes sense. But if you're doing what Steven said and you're always kind of networking, you're always thinking through these questions, you're always recording, it's going to make that next stage of wherever you're going so much easier because you already have those. That's a great, I should start doing that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And it's a great framing, proactive versus reactive. I think that's a really good way to frame it.
Yeah. Cool. Kind of want to switch gears here because there's something else in the guide that really caught my eye. It's when you were talking about core values. So,
Mm.
versing yourself on the company's core values and then putting your answers in a form that kind of fits with those. The reason I'm asking this question is because Climate People, we're a recruitment agency, we work with job seekers and then we also do advisory services for companies. And the number one piece of advice that we give to hiring managers is to vet candidates based off of the core values. We say you can teach skills, you can upskill, you can do anything that's these hard skills, but if you don't align with this candidate on their core values, then it's never going to work out. So I liked your advice of making sure that people are doing that work. Can you give some more insights into how to exactly go about doing that? Like, how do you make sure your answers are aligning?
Yeah. Yeah, I guess I think there's the core values thing, depending on the company, they emphasize it more or less. So for example, Airbnb, they really emphasize it. They have like this like cultural interview, or I think they just ask you about like your passions, like literally like like hobbies and stuff. Not, nothing job related. And Amazon is famous for their leadership principles, and they want you to respond with that framing, and also with the STAR method. If you could just Google that, you find a lot of articles on that. And so I think, obviously it's like if you want to work at a company and if you look at a company and the core values don't align at all, like maybe it's I don't know, for this audience, maybe it's like an oil company or something, right? Then like, I'm not, yeah, I won't go open that debate, but like, let's say you are like, that's against my core values, then don't apply there, unless you really have no choice, right? But I think there are ways you can frame your questions that speaks to their core values. And the first part is just literally understanding what their core values are. It's kind of annoying to like read the core values documents. They're not quite as good as when you listen to one of the founders talk about it. So in my article, I talk about this guy, Dan Kreuter. He has a YouTube channel mostly for tech companies. But it works pretty well where he like cuts snippets of like, the Airbnb founder talking about the core values with examples. And it's just a good way to kind of in the background get yourself in the right mindset. So I would always do this. I would look at it before I started applying to a company, before I did the behavioral part, like with the hiring manager, especially if I knew the company cared a lot about it. But it was a good thing to listen to the night before an interview, like if I'm just like wrapping up a workout and then going to go to sleep and interview the next day. Again, this is thinking about operationalizing, right? Like you probably shouldn't intensely do coding problems, or whatever the equivalent in consulting is, these technical things, or the homework assignment the night before, but you can do something that's a little less intense. And this is one of those things, just kind of listening, let your unconscious brain um, pick up signals.
Yeah, yeah. And then if like I know Steven said that Dan Croiter is probably more tech focused, but like there are so many climate podcasts out there. So a great idea before interviewing at a climate company is try to see, has MCJ done a podcast with that founder? Has any of the other green techies, whatever they are out there, done a podcast? And then listen to that. They're gonna say things that if you say that, then be like, oh wow, this person really did their homework and understand. So yeah, that's great
Yeah,
advice.
that's a great point. I think I did this in 2019. Podcasts didn't really take off to the same degree until COVID. And actually, just general networking tip, like whenever I try to meet, when I meet someone now, I always go on like Spotify and see if they've done a podcast or a YouTube video, and I listen to it on like 2x. It really kind of helps jumpstart the conversation, makes it more efficient. You cut through some of the like background obligatory stuff.
Yep. It gives you the opportunity to like ask real meaningful questions that
Yeah,
aren't just raising the surface, that show that you've done your homework and all of that. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Cool. Can you talk about referrals a little bit more? I know you mentioned that quite a bit in your offers. How is that helpful? How do you go about asking for referrals? Just add some more flavor there.
Yeah. Okay. So when I did my job search, different macro environment, pretty much as a senior software engineer, like most people, I would either get inbound, or if I got an employee to refer me, I'd get at least a recruiter screen and most likely like a phone screen. But even now, it's even more important. So I think there's probably like two types, and Natalie, you and climate people would know more. But my sense is there are companies that basically their in-house recruiters will like spend more time on your resume or be guaranteed to look on your resume for anything that's submitted via referral. So it's really just about getting any person to submit your resume. Doesn't really matter how close they are. Other companies, they don't. They're like, that doesn't matter. We really only care about the people that you've worked with in the past. If you can actually provide like a proper referral testimonial for that person. But either way, I think what it means is like whenever you apply to a company, if you can, don't apply to the job directly. Look on LinkedIn to see if you know someone at the company, or you know someone who knows someone at the company. If you go on climate tech list, for example, I have a whole post about this. There's a jobs table and there's like a whole column for like LinkedIn people you may know at this company. And you can actually create that as a quick Chrome search, and then you can just use that, LIC space name of the company, and it should do that search for you. Again, back to operationalizing and really being proactive.
Yeah. Yeah. That's super helpful. And I mean, climate people, whenever we get a referral, we look at it first. You look at it longer. When you have hundreds of applications and someone's like, oh, I know this person, it makes them stand out. And that's the whole goal here. So yeah, super important. If you can try to get someone to refer you, it makes it personable. And when you think about it, if
Yeah.
you met a random person at the grocery store, you might not say hi, but if your friend is with them, you're definitely going to say hi to that person because you know your friend. So
Yeah.
just kind of
Even if it's not quite rational, right? That's just,
right.
we're humans and that's what happens.
Yeah, exactly. So cool. Awesome. Lastly, before we wrap up this section, in the breakout rooms, we're going to do mock interviews with 2 questions. So I wanted to just get your opinion, Steven, on best practices for answering these 2 questions. The first is, tell me about yourself. Do you have any advice for answering that question?
Yeah, I think with all of these questions, thinking about a structure, right? So probably for telling me about yourself, a good structure would be, where am I coming from? What, why I did a transition and what am I looking for now? And, keep that short, right? The kind of 3 steps or 2 steps thing. Yeah, there's probably much better guides on that specific question out there, but that's my
Yeah.
initial thought.
Yeah, definitely having the structure. And then another thing I'll focus on is so many people, when they answer this question, dwell on their past. They're like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I did this, I did this. And they go on for so long about what they did. Whereas the most powerful answer to this question is focusing on where you want to be and drawing parallels between what you did in the past that connect to that. So, like, I'm a marketer with an experience in this. I'm looking for jobs in climate and I'm interested in this. So, like, again, it's kind of some reverse psychology here, but you're making them see you in this position by focusing on where you aim to be rather than dwelling on your past. And then again, I would say this question 100% you need to follow Steven's advice of thinking through this one, making sure you have a structure, because again, people ramble, and rambling in an interview is probably the worst thing that you could do. Where tell me about yourself is 100% a question you're going to get asked. So make sure you're thinking through what you want to say, make sure it's conveying those points well, and then most importantly, make sure it's concise. Don't go longer than, I don't know, what do you say? I would say like a minute, but maybe that's a little bit
Maybe
short.
even 30 seconds, right? I have
Yeah.
a short and long version.
Yeah, so that's a good idea
Yeah.
too, have a short and long version. But yeah, I would say those are the key points. Make sure you're connecting this to the job. So you're not just rambling about irrelevant experiences if you're applying for a job. Make sure you're tying all those connections to that.
Yeah,
Cool.
exactly.
Awesome. And then do you have any insights on the question, where do you see yourself in 5 years? Or like some question that's a version of that?
Yeah, yeah. I think this is both like a gotcha question and could be positive, right? Because like you don't want to be like, oh, I want to go start a company, right? Most companies know you're probably not, depending on the industry, but let's say tech companies, climate, you know, tech companies that have a climate emphasis or climate tech companies, startups, they're like, you're probably not going to stay 5 years. It's so hard to predict that. Average tenure is probably 2 or 3 years, but you don't want to be like, I'm going to go here and then go do my own thing. So depending on your background, you could frame it different ways. So for example, for me, I was like, oh, I want to find a long-term place I could stay because, hey, look, I stayed 5 years at Tableau, right? And that was actually a very strong argument for the recruiter to see because it tied it to what my background is. Um, yeah, so probably think through like kind of what all the potential ways you're signaling if you respond to that. Maybe if you tell too much, if you're too transparent, rather. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great point. And then always talking about like growing into the role, like upskilling, continuing education, your ability to like learn and all of that. But yeah, that's a great point. You definitely don't want to say, I plan on leaving. That would not be good. And then finally, if we have extra time, we're gonna also talk about why are you leaving? Why are you looking for a job? That I would say is definitely a gotcha
Yeah,
question.
definitely gotcha. Yeah.
Quickly, any insights on that question, Stephen?
Yeah. Okay. So a difference since 2019 is there have been a lot of layoffs. My sense is that, and I'd probably call some people to gauge that. It might be normalized to say that, hey, I got laid off, right? Because so many people, especially in these like white collar tech jobs, got laid off. So it's like pretty normal, and that just kind of explains it the right way. If that's not the reason you're leaving, if it's really bad, your company's currently really bad, like again, it's a gotcha question. You probably don't want to be like, my current company sucks. You can frame it in terms of like, I'm seeking new challenges. I spent X time here. Especially if you spend a lot of time somewhere, you can just use that to your advantage and say like, hey, I spent a lot of time here. You know, maybe you got laid off, right? Like you could just say, I spent a lot of time here. I'm looking for something new. Wanted to, work in climate, right? That's an easy one if you're not coming from climate, working in climate.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. 100% agree with all of that. Never want to talk badly. I think it's okay to say I got laid off. I would add some context to that. My company had to eliminate this entire team, something like that along those lines.
Yeah.
Make it clear that it was just the macroeconomic conditions, not something that you did,
Right.
obviously. And then, yeah, I would say that you're looking for new things. You wanted to change a pace. You want to work in a startup environment. All of those things are great. Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Stephen. Any final thoughts that you want to add before we go into breakout rooms about anything interview related?
Yeah, I would say, back to the thing about operationalizing, like, and being proactive, like really think about this process. And it's not, you have to do it all at once. Write some documents, iterate on it. Just treat it as a skill that you have to learn. And by the way, you'll probably be able to use at least some of this for your next job search anyway. So you're kind of building like a life skill almost, right? And once you get to that point, like I think there's a hump a lot of people pass where they no longer are intimidated by job search and interviews, and it's like a more of a they're in control kind of thing. So yeah, and read the article. It's very, very thorough. So
Yeah, that's a great point. I love that. That it gets easier with time, and it really does. So, yeah, can't recommend reading that article. Like I said in the beginning, this was just your teaser. Now go dive deep into that because it's super helpful. Cool. Well, thank you again, Stephen. I appreciate you so much, and I learned a lot. And again, always love collaborating with you. So thank you for your
Yeah.
time.
Thank you, everyone.
Cool. Awesome. So now we are going to go into breakout rooms. I'm going to open them up, and we can have 4 people in each room. And what we're going to do is we are going to practice our answers to those questions that we just went over. So we're going to go around in a circle in about 2 minutes. Every person will talk about, tell me about yourself. So practicing your elevator pitch. And then the next question is, where do you see yourself in 5 years? Again, 2 minutes or so for that. And then the rest of the people in the breakout room should offer insights, advice, help into improving that. So yeah, that's going to be the format. I'm going to go ahead and put us into breakout rooms now. And yeah, I'll drop the prompts. Before we do that, does anyone else have questions? You can raise your hand or just drop them in the chat. Cool. Alrighty, so you should see your breakout rooms now. Feel free to join them, and then I'm going to drop the questions right here. Awesome. Welcome back, everybody. Hope it was fun getting to know everyone and practicing some of those questions. I'd love to have someone come off mute and share a few takeaways from their breakout room. If anyone wants to be brave, the floor is yours.
You know, I mentioned some negative things about my, like in my why.
Yeah.
I said, shall I just say what I said?
Yeah.
I said I don't want to. Sorry, I'm slowly burning in the sun as well. I'm trying to like
Get
hide.
that.
But I said that I'm in marketing and I'm trying to move towards like stakeholder engagement and like climate communications.
Mhm.
And I said that I in my previous role I was like contributing to unsustainable overconsumption. And I suppose that might not be the right thing to say, depending on the role that I'm applying for. But I think I would get that if there was a person in front of me and they had a company, I could think about that. But I think in that moment, so it's just reminded me to
Yeah.
think about not mentioning something in a negative light that might like
And
the
I think that same topic could be easily shared in a different light. Like, I want to be more conscious. I want to work for a company that does these things, and it's saying the same thing without
yeah,
hating on the other company. Yeah, that's a great insight,
yeah.
and something that you need to think about, or subconsciously it happens. Yeah, great point. Thanks for sharing. Anyone else? Did anyone practice the second question of where do you see yourself in 5 years? Did anyone have any insights that they got back from that? Drop it in the chat too if you don't want to say it out loud. Cool. It's all right. I know it's gonna be scary to come off of mute and say it. Awesome. Well, if no one has any other insights, again, you can drop them in the chat if you would rather do that. Just wanted to give a quick plug that Climate People is hosting, I'm hosting a more in-depth 4-hour climate career bootcamp coming up in the middle of June. If you wanted to take some of those insights that Stephen gave today and take them 3 steps further, that bootcamp would be a great place to do that. I'm going to drop a link in the chat for that. Go ahead and fill out that form and I'll send more information over to you. And then also, as you know, our climate career advancement sessions are every single month. This time on the second Wednesday of the month. June session is going to be on different continuing education options. It's going to be a panel. So I know we all have heard of Terra, we've all heard of Voice, of 1.5, all those different cohort options. And one of the main questions I always get is, which one should I do? Do you recommend doing them? So we're going to have a panel of different representatives from those different cohorts on to talk about their continuing education and how that can be helpful to your job search. So if you're interested in doing that, I'm going to drop a link to our calendar in the chat now so that you can sign up for that session. And I'm also including a form where if you want to be informed, informed pun there, about upcoming climate career advancement sessions, fill out that form and we will send you an email. I will also send an email with all of the stuff that I just said, so you don't have to scramble for those links now, but keep your eye out for that email later this afternoon. And yeah, thank you all so much again for joining today. I hope that you learned something. And then if you have any further follow-up questions or want to run something else by me, feel free to add me on LinkedIn and we can bounce back and forth in messages there. Cool. Awesome. Well, have a great rest of your Wednesday and we'll see you in next month. Bye.
Thank you.